They sought to silence her, but one quiet action ignited something no one anticipated. If you have ever asked yourself how true change starts, not in headlines, but in quiet rooms and persistent hearts, this one's for you. Press play to listen. It started with a voice they attempted to silence. A woman who would not be silenced. In a city weighed down by old power and quiet fear, one moment of quiet defiance lit a fire that no courtroom ruling could contain. What happens when standing up means standing alone? And when truth is blurred, who decides what justice really looks like? This is the story of how a single voice, steady and unshaken, echoed far beyond the walls meant to confine it. Let's begin. It takes only 60 seconds to ignite a firestorm. Picture a crowded auditorium at Texas State University. You can almost sense the silence just before something explosive is about to occur. That breathless moment before Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett utters something that no one had the courage to say out loud. Then, with whip-crack speed, it's done. Shut your mouth, ape. The president sneers. The world stands still for a fleeting instant, but Jasmine, she doesn't stir, doesn't wink. Her voice slices through the silence, smooth and serene, searing with quiet strength. In that instant, she reminds us all that dignity is not given, it's taken, it's taken. And with that, the room changes, because one woman would not give in. From Judge Naomi Ruth Calloway's courtroom, where every gavel strike lands like a thunderclap, to the online wildfire of We Heard Her, this story spreads. A story of bravery. Of someone standing up when it would have been easier to shrink. We watch as town halls in Dayton and Detroit hum with energy. Veterans, teachers, teens, all finding their voices. The buzz of courage is contagious. Feel the electricity in the air. That's the crackle of fear yielding to something more. This isn't merely a response, it's the beginning of a reckoning. The Texas State Auditorium throbs as if it were alive, suspended on a single held breath. Files of chairs led away toward the stage. Students grip notebooks, journalists hold cameras steady, and professors drink sour coffee, eyebrows furrowed. Overhead lights cascade down on signs reading racial unity and economic justice, but they hang with an air of being more of a challenge than a guarantee. Behind the curtain, a figure emerges, voice steady but earnest. No guarantees of the usual politics back. And fourth, no, something genuinely real is going to occur tonight. And everyone in that room understands it. At the far end of the stage, President Donald J. Trump, his red tie clipped, his shoulders bracing, his bearing imposing across from him. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, dressed crisp in navy, standing firm, her gaze steady and unbroken. She moves like someone who's rehearsed this moment 100 times, dreams and nightmares included. The crowd leans forward. The moderator raises his hand and opens the floor. The lights burn. The cameras turn. It's not a typical town hall meeting. It's a pressure cooker, and it's ready to blow. They sit across from one another, 12 feet of gleaming wood and raw tension between them. The radiance of the spotlights catches each twitch, each look. This isn't live television. This is live history. Trump sits forward, the leather chair creaking beneath his weight. His eyes narrow. A reporter lifts a pen. Dudes exchange nervous glances. Cameras start to record. Everyone's waiting for the first spark. Then Trump throws down the match. We've done more for the black community, he says loudly, than any president since Lincoln. Gasps, murmurs, sideways looks ripple through the crowd. Jasmine stays perfectly still. The silence after that. Scent is louder than the applause he wanted. Camera flashes catch in her eyes. Fingers fold softly on the table. She lets the silence stretch, and then she talks. Her voice is low, but each word strikes hard. Gratitude doesn't replace justice, she says. When you measure progress only with gratitude, you erase what was never fixed. You silence those still shouting to be heard. A stinging gasp shoots through the front row. Even the moderator freezes. But Trump doesn't back down. He leans in, lip curled. And then it happens. Shut your mouth, ape. The words land on the air like a slap. The room freezes ice, cold. You could hear a pin drop, papers rustle, a student clutches the seat in front of her, a photographer freezes in mid-shot, phones buzz, social media erupts, hashtags blossom like wildfire. But in that room, time freezes. Jasmine does not blink. No tear, no stumble. She sets her chin and lays her elbows on the table. Her voice, when it returns, is as unshakable as steel. Mr. President, she says calmly, I wasn't taught to respond to ignorance with silence, then a pause. But I did learn that when a person shows you who they are, you listen, and America just did. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. A breath escapes the crowd. Then there's the roar. Applause erupts. Initially a solitary clap, then a wave. Some students jump to their feet. Others weep and clap at the same time. Even the moderator appears shaken. Trump, on the other hand, squirms uncomfortably as though he has just caught sight of himself properly for the first time. Screens nationwide replay the clip in a continuous loop. Talk shows stop dead. Twitter won't let up. Shock, admiration, outrage, all of it courses in, but no report captures that still wholly. Moment when Jasmine stepped onto the stage, absorbed the taunt, and spat back sparks. At the table, she sits quietly stashing away her notes. No excess words, no warm smiles. She simply sits there, strong, unflinching, a monument in motion. She didn't require the final word because the truth had already spoken. Trump tries to keep going, to pretend the shift didn't happen, but everyone knows it did, and there's no going back. The auditorium didn't feel like a stage for politics anymore. It felt sacred, transformed by the quiet defiance of one woman who simply refused to be reduced. When the cameras finally pulled away, the air buzzed with something different. Voices, once whispers, turned into calls, then cheers. Jasmine Crockett got up and collected her belongings. The clapping did not cease. It followed her, wave upon wave. Journalists surrounded her, asking questions. Students grasped for selfies and autographs, hands trembling with adoration. For a brief, shining moment on a platform constructed for hype, a truthful rarity had burst through. No spin, no makeup, only blunt and raw honesty, and to millions of viewers, particularly those who'd been informed that they didn't count, it cut more painfully than any insult ever had. This wasn't merely a clapback, it was a call to action. Back in the auditorium, time had hung suspended. Everyone breathed the same held breath as the insult rang out, cutting and cruel, in the room. But Jasmine didn't blink. Her back remained straight. Her eyes never wavered from the man seated opposite her. Some anticipated a scream, a cry, an angry storming off. But what they witnessed was far more debilitating: stillness. And in that stillness dwelled her true strength. She smoothly smoothed a lock of hair behind her ear, her voice unshakable when she finally broke the silence. "Mr. President, I was not brought up to trade ignorance with silence." She paused, like the final strains of music in a grand cathedral. "But I learned that when you find out who someone is, you listen. America just did. You almost heard the world lean in. That one word created a ripple effect among the crowd, like a stone thrown into a pond. A journalist let his pen fall from his hand. Camera zoomed in, not wanting to miss a moment. Students were stuck mouths agape. Even Trump's signature smirk hesitated, replaced with something not said, possibly even shocked. Then the dam burst. First were the claps, tenuous, then fearless. Then the whole room was standing. Thunderous applause rolled, feet stamped, eyes brimmed. It wasn't merely encouragement, it was acknowledgement. They weren't merely applauding her courage, they were applauding a reality they delayed acknowledging far too long. Jasmine sat quietly, her hands clasped together. A small, gentle smile spread across her face. She didn't rub it in. She didn't brag about it. She simply listened, let the noise carry her. This wasn't going to be about winning a moment. It was going to be about claiming a message. A student raised a phone to take. Her serene profile, beautifully silhouetted against the light of happy faces. The photo went instantly, shining into living rooms nationwide. In Sit, a grandmother wiped away tears and whispered to her granddaughter, "That's how you stand tall." In Charlotte, a retired civil rights attorney leaned back in his chair, a single tear running down his face. Back on stage, the microphones shook with the weight of it all. Journalists yelled questions, pushing recorders into the air, but the din was too great to make out anything at all. Jasmine waited. She allowed the applause to fade of its own accord like an ebbing tide. And then she rose, unhurried and confident, adjusted her jacket, and nodded quietly to the audience. A final surge of applause struck the walls, not raucous reverent. It was like a blessing, a moment chiseled in stone. Side, the corridors rang with reporters, microphones, cameras, voices upon voices in a cacophony. "Congresswoman Crockett, how could you remain so composed? What gave you the courage to talk so eloquently?" She didn't get caught up in it, just smiled softly and replied with soft precision, "I spoke from experience. I spoke for those without a microphone. I think the truth will always endure an insult." She pushed through the throng as if floating, swept by something greater than adrenaline. Hope, perhaps her purpose. In the green room, her communications director, Tasha, enveloped her in a hug. "They're calling you the adult in the room," Tasha whispered, voice heavy with emotion. The whole world saw it. Jasmine hugged her back, but in her head, she had already gone on to that little girl in Tulsa who penned a letter to her. To a veteran in Oklahoma who wept after their last encounter, to the individuals she bore in her heart each time she stepped up to a podium. This wasn't the peak. This was just the start. That evening in her apartment in Fort Worth, Jasmine removed her heels and fell onto the old couch. The apartment was still except for the sound of the city outside. Streetlight light slanted across the walls. Her phone rang and rang. She ignored it. There'd be time enough for all that later. Tonight, she just breathed. Throughout the internet, her words burst forth. "When someone shows you who they are, you listen. It pervaded everything. It was quoted by bloggers. It was used to construct lessons by teachers. It was used to craft sermons by pastors. Exhausted citizens made it their rallying cry. But for Jasmine, it was never a catchphrase. It was something more, a truth seared into her by years of experience. A principle passed down through hurt and strength. It was not a soundbite, it was a norm. The following morning, the top of her city's largest newspaper read, "Crockett's calm rebuttal drowns out presidential slur." Below the headline, a picture captured the instant. Jason leaning forward as her lips were starting to shape the now famous words. The photo went viral, from Dallas street corners to Portland cafes, from urban centers to rural Appalachian towns. Wherever it traveled, people slowed down. They gazed. They recalled what it is to speak back without yelling. Something amazing occurred in Jasmine's serenity. She didn't merely throw back a retort, she took over the narrative. She reminded an exhausted country that respect doesn't shout to be heard, that real power speaks softly where anger bellows. While pundits debated and the web hummed, Jasmine remained standstill, serene, unflappable, a living testament to a nation's unspoken question: what does dignity in extremity look like? And for those who recalled the shadowy pages of American history, her words reverberated like a belated promise for the younger generation. It was a lesson in the making. Dignity is never voluntary, justice is never up for debate, and grace can move the world. For Jasmine Crockett, that evening would never be forgotten. It would remain a personal milestone, a character check accomplished under the brightest lights. It wasn't merely a matter of standing your ground. It was evidence that maintaining your grace in the fire is among the most courageous actions for an individual to undertake. The second that clip went up on Twitter, all the momentum changed. In Fort Worth kitchens and Tulsa diners, subway stops in New York, phones flashed with three stark words: "We heard her." Sick indeed, but also a heartbeat. Only seconds of Jasmine's firm voice and unflinching gaze had cut sharply through the veneer of spin politics. No filter, no spin, only the hard truth, shattering the facade of civility. And once that thing got out, it could never be contained. The phrase blazed through text messages, flashed on cable news tickers, and blared across morning radio. Everywhere it went, it multiplied. In her tiny apartment, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table under the dim light of a single bulb. Shadows stretched long over the dull linoleum. A glass of water glistened under her hand, firm but for the subtle shiver still vibrating in her fingertips. On the table, her campaign file was open, its pages filled with scribbled notes, policy talking points, local issues, late-night strategy session jottings. But that was far away tonight, and because this instant wasn't about a platform. It was about presence, about what one does when insulted before millions. Courage is not always boisterous. Sometimes it is as subtle as not blinking. She took out her phone and scrolled through the deluge of messages. Thousands of retweets. Personal messages from complete strangers who told her they'd finally felt understood. In Little Rock, a teacher had written her quote on an entire blackboard. A retired veteran in Okomo had left a voice message, his voice shaking, confessing it was the first time in years that he'd wept. And in Detroit, a college student had written, "I don't even like politics, but now I know why I matter." Jasmine set the phone aside, screen radiant against the blackness. She opened her eyes, and before the silence could settle back in, there was a gentle tap on the door. Coach Mitchell, her former track coach, entered the hallway, taller than memory, shoulders broad under his frayed jacket. He slung his old leather duffel bag over his shoulder as if he had just come in from practice, not 10 years earlier. She embraced him, clutched to her chest the man who had made her run faster, dig deeper, never settle for second best. "You were radiant," he growled. Jasmine exhaled. "I felt as if I was walking on glass. Let it cut," he whispered, "but don't let it shatter you." His words were a reminder of the truth she knew already. Some wounds create space for growth. Coach Mitchell was a living bridge between the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming. But even his calm presence couldn't still the torrent of questions in her head. What would this cost her family? Would the next move be buried under hashtags and headlines? Could quiet power actually move a movement? As if to answer, her phone rang again, a soft ring she'd only reserved for two people. She walked into the hallway and picked up Patricia. Her mother's voice was warm and concerned. "Baby girl, are you all right?" Jasmine leaned against the counter. "I'm fine, Mama." It was a soft lie. Static buzzed down the line. Then her father's voice, deep and measured. "I saw the clip." Jasmine grinned through tears. "You held your ground. Your granddaddy would have been proud. I just said what was right." Her mom breathed, heavy with unspoken memories. "You said what we never had the courage to say." Fear dwelled in her mother's voice, not for what Jasmine said, but for the tempest that could come afterward. History, after all, had a means of coming back around. It wasn't pride. It was love disguised as fear. Judge Ivan Ramira floated into Jasmine's mind. Cold eyes, colder courtroom. A judge who had once dismissed her request to consider racial bias as though it meant nothing. Even him, she thought, may have hesitated at what the president had spoken the night before. You gave us a reason to hold our heads high again, Patricia whispered. Jasmine allowed herself to breathe. I needed to prove that silence isn't safety. There was a silence that stretched out, her parents miles away. Hearts still bound, weighed what the world outside their front door looked like. Then her father's voice, low and forceful. You didn't speak for you tonight. You spoke for all of us who've been told to shut up and sit down. That statement broke something wide open in her. Tears streamed silently down her face. She nodded, even though they couldn't see her. I couldn't have done it without knowing you were behind me. They stood there in silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that holds everything. After the call, Jasmine charged her phone and turned to the table, where campaign documents were still untouched. It all seemed so little now. She recalled the law student she used to be, trembling, hesitant. She recalled staying up all night studying, sharing ideas with friends who feared they'd be reprimanded for speaking their minds, rehearsing her voice in the mirror time and again just to discover her courage. None of that prepared her for the outpouring of accolades, but it had readied her for what was most important, the stillness afterwards, the accounting, the resolve. Coach Mitchell, now sitting across from the room, looked at her kindly. His being didn't demand anything of her, it just held space. A reminder that even champions require a place to lie their weary heads. Jasmine sat on the edge of the table, legs drawn up before her, and allowed the silence to enclose her. Outside, Fort Worth hummed softly. Distant sirens, traffic buzzing, a dog yelping somewhere down the block. The world hadn't stopped. It had just shifted, and Jasmine had been the cause of it all. The hashtag still roiled, but in here, only her breathing measured time. She had confronted a president and didn't break. Now was the hard work, translating that viral flame into lasting change, translating emotion into action, ensuring we heard her was not a moment but a movement. Jasmine stepped over to the window. The city lay before her, softly lit. She pressed a palm onto the glass. This is only the beginning, she whispered. And within that little quiet space, with her coach's strength and her parents' voices in her heart, she started planning not how to remain viral, how to create something that will last. Because true bravery doesn't stop at the microphone. It begins in the silence afterward, but silence never lasts long. The next morning, just as sunlight touched the rooftops, Jasmine's phone vibrated again. She scrubbed the sleep from her eyes and looked at the screen. A headline glared back at her. "I have to slob 2 boys uncovers Crockett's shattering past." What was loaded wasn't news, it was spin. Red banners, fuzzy documents, clickbait pictures. The thumbnail said, "The real Jasmine Crockett, exposed." Jasmine Crockett glanced over the room. No camera lenses, no blinking red lights, no background humming of live stream, just people waiting. She tightened her grip on the mic. "I know that they made you keep quiet this evening," she started, her tone smooth, but with a forcefulness. "But I didn't arrive here to perform for headlines. I arrived here to listen." The room fell silent like a collective breath, because truth does not require a lens. It requires ears. In the silence, something potent took hold. Jasmine spoke clearly. No talking points, no spin, just anecdotes. Her first year in court, the grandmother who sweetened her tea after a long case. The moment she nearly walked away from law after losing a trial she felt passionate about. The room leaned in. She paused, letting silence stretch before continuing. "The system is built to make people like us tired enough to stop asking questions, but I'm not tired yet." A few quiet claps, then more, until the sound swelled into a round of applause. Even without the cameras, truth was finding its way. But outside the building, the world wasn't so kind. Social media spun out of control. Hashtags changed. News outlets analyzed every word she'd ever uttered. Thompson doubled down, releasing another blog entry. Gaines went on cable news, referencing Jasmine's speech ban as proof of guilt. And then there was the leak. A staffer no one had any idea who emailed an internal memo from Calloway's office. A memo riddled with phrases like "control the optics" and contained Crockett's influence. It went viral on Twitter. By the following morning, trending hashtags were #leather speak. And this is what silencing looks like. The tide turned again. Roman burst into her apartment, laptop clutched in one hand, coffee in the other. "You need to see this." He was breathless. A clip played. It wasn't from a studio or large news agency. It was a grainy cell phone video recorded from a back row at last night's town hall. Despite recordings being prohibited, someone had disobeyed the decree. The clip recorded Jasmine uttering it. "We've been taught to whisper when we should have been roaring. That ends here." And that single line, it went viral. More than 6 million views in 24 hours. She'd been muzzled on stage, but her message still cut through. Roman smiled. We didn't film it, but someone believed enough to risk it. Jasmine rested against the counter, the weight of it all bearing down upon her but not crushing her. I have to see this woman, she breathed. Tasha, always so serene, appeared in the doorway. We located her. Name is Amina Torres, first-year medical student. Desires anonymity for the time being, but she told us your words transformed her. Jasmine smiled, eyes brimming with tears. She restored my voice. The room was charged. You could sense it in your very bones. Texas Southern University wasn't merely packed. It was holding its breath, waiting. Jasmine Crockett stood on the edge of the stage, her palms gentle against the wood. She gazed out at the faces. So many faces. Some young and inquisitive, some old and weathered, but all attentive. I hear the fears of disruption. She started slowly, voice low, but audible. But disruption occurs when people are silenced. There was a soft murmur that swept across the crowd. She leaned in. Now picture a little girl seeing this tonight. Seeing people in uniforms waiting to pull the plug, the instant truth gets uncomfortable. She let that vision hover there. What does that teach her? That her voice has to remain little if power gets uneasy. A murmur of agreement swept the audience. Heads nodded, hands clasped armrests. One officer at the back got up, hand by the mic switch, but then hesitated. Something had changed. The people weren't cowering anymore. Jasmine's words ran like a river now, building power. She talked of communities ignored, families shattered by policy, not by crime. Goals where history was erased to guard comfort, not truth. Her voice trembled once, but not out of fear, out of conviction. Injustice doesn't only knock on the door, she said. Sometimes it comes in robes. Sometimes it makes laws. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, from somewhere toward the rear, a voice stopped the silence. Repeat it, someone yelled. Jasmine didn't flinch. Injustice has many faces. And the most dangerous one smiles as it mutes you. The room erupted, not in bedlam, not in commotion, but in a standing ovation so thunderous that the walls shook, the officers, they froze. Orders or not, they couldn't deny what was occurring. This was no attack. This was a community healing, and that was something no judge could bottle up. Callaway attempted one final attempt to shut her down. The message came over the PA system in the auditorium, cold and clipped. This event is subject to Harris County laws. Any unauthorized comments will terminate immediately. A threat, pure and simple. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She left the warning suspended like a challenge. Then, without shouting, without pleading, she replied, "I will not be silenced," she declared, her voice firm. Because silence would tell too many little girls there's nothing you can say when power insults you. She gazed out into the crowd, into the eyes of mothers, students, teachers, fathers, and we who came here tonight. If we lose this moment, we'd be telling those girls that they are not even worth whispering about. The crowd exploded. Applause boomed like a wave crashing against the stone. Some rose to their feet. Some cried. All were convinced. And in the clamor, the officers lining the walls, quiet sentinels of power, became irrelevant. Jasmine didn't revel in the moment. She lowered her head in silent honor, not for herself, but for them. And then she ended with what would become the cry of a movement. Tonight, we demonstrated that truth is louder than any edict. That bravery is power no judge can imprison. Now let's bring that truth to our streets, our classrooms, our corporate boardrooms, and demand the justice that is our birthright. As she stepped off the stage, a young woman stood in the front row, voice trembling but bold. "We're with you," she said. And just like that, the chant began. We're with you. We're with you. Not politics. Not protest. Promise. Outside, night had cooled the air, but the people glowed with purpose. Conversations sparked. Phone numbers exchanged. E-plans whispered under streetlights. Teachers were already planning classroom readings. Students were organizing study circles. Parents spoke of starting their own town halls. And across the quad, the auditorium shone behind them, its light pouring out like a beacon. Jasmine stood in the doorway, allowing the fervor to wash over her like fuel. She had come to speak, but now a movement had responded. By the second night, the spark had turned into fire. In a basement of a church in Little Rock, folding tables were littered with flyers and coffee cups. The sign above, Clear Voices Little Rock chapter. Dozens of people sat underneath. Teachers, parents, retirees, and teenagers with dog-eared notebooks. A retired school teacher rose and told what had occurred in her classroom. "Say, read them Jasmine's speech," she said. One of her more reserved students, Marcus, rose up after and said if she can speak that on national television, then I can tell my principal our dress code is unjust. The room exploded, not just with applause, but with purpose. In Detroit, the sound of a gymnasium rang out with fresh voices. A young group of entrepreneurs and artists had begun their own Clear Voices chapter. They posted Jasmine's words like sacred graffiti next to images of shattered playgrounds and abandoned stores. They weren't seeking permission. They were mobilizing. At Dayton, Ohio, a timid girl named Alina stood in front of her church group, hands trembling. "I've been bullied for enjoying science," she spoke softly. But when Congresswoman Crockett stated that silence would convey little girls, there's nothing they can say to power when it insults them, I knew I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. The audience was on their feet, and Tallahassee Air Force retired Sergeant Tom stood at the rear of a crowded library. A self-proclaimed Republican, he cleared his throat. "I've witnessed men die for this nation. I've watched bombs explode. But I've never been more shaken than when I heard someone in power refer to a woman, an ape, on live television." He stopped. "Crockett reminded me that respect is not given, it's taken, and my hometown is owed that kind of respect again." No one objected, they just stood together. Little Rock to Dayton, Detroit to Baton Rouge. The Clear Voices movement caught fire like roots in concrete, kitchen table conversations, cafeteria arguments, porch-like gatherings, no stars, no catchphrases, just folks, regular, remarkable people, sharing truth like a flame. The quiet never lasted. Night had descended on Fort Worth. Jasmine had just gotten back from her 4th town hall in 4 days, her voice still ringing against the gymnasium walls of Cedar Rapids. When the next attack came, her phone vibrated. Exclusive. Crockett's hidden agenda exposed. Another headline. Another online slime. She opened it. Manipulated photo glared back, her own face twisted into a grotesque sneer, superimposed on chaos, fire, and bloody protest. Byline: Alex Thompson judge Namie Ruth Calloway's fingerprints were all over it. The judge, incognito behind judicial impartiality, had spilled more bits to Thompson, pieces of ancient case files, cherry-picked quotes out of context, anonymous claims dug up from old records, a smear packaged as a scoop. Together, Thompson and Calloway weren't merely attempting to beat Jasmine's campaign. They were attempting to erase her legacy. On the sidewalk outside her campaign office, a small group of reporters had accumulated. Light from camera bulbs shone like miniature suns, sending long shadows flickering across the pavement. She emerged outside. No podium, no aides, just Jasmine standing in the cold stillness, muffled in a charcoal coat and determination. She walked up to a lone mic on the curb. "I defended the powerless in a court of law," she said, "and I'm proud of that." Her voice was low even, but it cut through the hum of idling cars like steel. Flashbulbs popped, pens scratched furiously. "I represented people who had no one else, a teenager arrested for loitering outside his grandmother's porch, a mother fighting eviction from her rent-stabilized home, a veteran struggling to find work after returning from war." Each account felt like a pulse, real, unarguable, human. The snippets Thompson had released attempted to make her into a villain, but under the lenient glow of Texas streetlights, reality was a face once more. "Those cases weren't errors," she said. "They were the symptoms of a system geared to punish the poor and the voiceless." A reporter approached. "Judge Calloway says these records indicate you defending criminals. Your reaction?" She paused, just long enough for the moment to deepen, then, calmly, "Some justice isn't only about guilt or innocence. It's about ensuring that every person has a fair chance to be heard. If our legal system can be weaponized to silence critics, then none of us are truly safe. I'm not here to defend every defendant. I'm here to defend a principle, that every person deserves representation. That principle is non-negotiable." The window in the office, her staff stood in silence. Tasha's gaze was tough. Greg's fingers flew over the keyboard. Even the tattered campaign signs on the wall seemed to lean forward, listening as Jasmine turned to re-enter. One of the young volunteers extended her hand tentatively, fearfully. She hesitated, seized the girl's hand. "Thank you," she breathed. "Keep talking." The girl blinked in shock, then smiled. Inside, Jasmine lost her coat and collapsed into the chair at the head of the campaign table. Surrounding her were her team: Tasha, Greg, Roman, and Alyssa. Exhaustion's weight clung to the air, but so did something keener: conviction. Roman spoke up. "They're already attacking you as soft on crime again. The opt-up, EDS, the tweets, the panels. It's relentless." Jasmine massaged her temple. "That's the plan. They want to bury every story that matters beneath an avalanche of noise." She looked up, eyes clear. "So let's turn the noise into clarity." Tasha leaned forward, her tablet glowing. "I've drafted a 2-minute video. No frills. You and Chambers, direct to camera. You address every lie, point by point, but you also show the lives you've touched." Jasmine breathed deeply, felt the night's gravity settle into her ribs like armor. Then she nodded. "Do it, and time it for dawn. Let the sun bear witness." During the ensuing hour, they worked quietly to put their plan into action. Alyssa went and called a few of Jasmine's past clients, individuals whose lives had been altered as a result of her work. She asked them to leave brief video messages of appreciation. Greg started weaving together significant points in Jasmine's legal history, cases that counted, cases that helped individuals, and relating them to policies she would soon be unveiling. While this was happening, Tasha organized with local TV stations to broadcast the video in their morning shows, then have a live Q&A online. Before they said their goodbyes, Jasmine went over to the window and gazed out across the Fort Worth skyline. The city glowed in a night sky, full of possibilities. She wasn't going to let a judge's scathing words and a blogger's distorted report cloud that perspective. Roman came over beside her, setting down a warm cup of coffee in her hand. "You need a break," he told her. She smiled wearily. "I'll rest once we've won this." She drank a sip, feeling the heat calm her. "They believe they can rattle me with photoshopped images and carefully selected quotes, but I know myself, most importantly. I know we." And in the ensuing days, things began to change. Her video, published at sunrise, played throughout Texas. Jasmine spoke in a calm, firm tone, buoyed by video of her working long nights on case files, strolling side by side with neighbors, consoling grieving families, and talking to youth advocates. And then there were the endorsements, a grandmother in Jackson dabbing away tears from her face, a San Antonio ex-gang member thanking Jasmine for second chances, a Milwaukee school counselor talking fervently about Jasmine's work with troubled youth. The judge's office put out an official statement, a bid to steer the focus back to courtroom etiquette and procedure, but it came across as tone-deaf. And then there was Thompson the blogger, whose attack piece had set the tempest off. He wrote a second post trying to brand Jasmine's video as overly overly rehearsed, but it fell flat. His flames were fanned into nothing by something much stronger: Jasmine's authenticity. Even the national television talk shows that had initially been enthralled by the furor started shifting the narrative. They portrayed her arc from public defender to Congress, describing her struggle to increase access to legal representation and drive sentencing reform. Pundits across the aisle conceded, some reluctantly, that her reply had resonated on a deep level. "No amount of Photoshop," one host stated, "can erase years of service." All the way back in Fort Worth, Jasmine stood in a sun-drenched conference room surrounded by letters, envelopes from small rural town, notes from teachers and veterans, crayon art from little children who had seen her as a beacon of hope. These weren't political positions, they were used gratitude reminder of what truly counted. And when the press came again, this time more deferential than inquisitive, Jasmine stood up, not in fear, but in grace. "I believe in every choice I made as an attorney," she said to the battery of microphones. "Each one was made in the hope that our justice system will work for those most in need. If making me a target accomplishes this, then let that target illuminate what too often remains in the shadows." Applause trailed her out, gold-plated doors closing softly behind. The clamor of the scandal seemed remote now, an echo in a distant hall. What lingered with Jasmine wasn't rage, it was conviction. Still confidence that justice might endure distortion, that truth would outlast spin, and that she was not leaving. Then, in that same building, Jasmine stood again, this time in a more modest room, sunlight pouring across a wooden floor. Surrounding her were the original members of a movement that had begun as a hashtag and blossomed into something tangible. Clear voices. There was a simple wooden podium at the front, emblazoned with the group's insignia, a straightforward ear grasping a flicker of flame. Behind her, there was a screen running through pictures of ordinary individuals, students, veterans, teachers, who had come forward to be heard. Jasmine's voice was measured, but forceful. On that day, she gave notice of the establishment of a scholarship for university students committed to service, and an online community where citizens could submit proposals for their communities, a budding organization of local chapters meeting not in conference rooms but in living rooms and school cafeterias. 3 days later, they arrived in Cedar Rapids. No fanfare, only the regular beat of a small town evening. Jasmine walked onto a temporary stage at a recreation center, her heels exchanged for flats, her demeanor unabated. No gala lights, no media swirl, only folding chairs and introspective faces. She spoke of economic rebirth, of restoring faith between citizens and city government. But what struck the crowd hardest was her tale of a scholarship, winner individuals who had transitioned from sleeping in shelters to graduating across stages, courtesy of the fund Jasmine's group had established that morning. Here in Bakersfield, they gathered in a south-facing echoing community center, where children's shouts of play beneath a mural filled the air. It said, "Our voices, our future." There, Jasmine heard more than she spoke. A single mother requested improved school lunches. A mechanic proposed a job training initiative. Some retirees floated the idea of a volunteer neighborhood patrol. No one was dismissed. Every voice had an audience. Each idea was written down with dedication and care, and now Wilmington, in no big building, only a corner sidewalk gathering. Children played with bubbles. Adults shared tales over paper cups of coffee. Jasmine got down to assist her in tying his shoe. He explained he wanted to become a teacher. She smiled and told him he would be an amazing one. A grandmother told her about walking home with groceries after dark and feeling unsafe. Jasmine squeezed her hand. "We'll work on that," she promised, and that night, Clear Voices pledged to help improve neighborhood lighting and start a mentorship program for local youth. And so it went in Fort Worth. As twilight engulfed the city, Jasmine sat silently on a creaky bench under a giant oak tree. She observed teenagers kicking a soccer ball back and forth on the field, their giggles careening around her. A mother led her two little girls down the path, sprinkled with scattered petals. The same people she used to mobilize with fervent speeches and online campaigns now lived on in quieter forms, in moments of happiness, of connection, of hope. She felt it, constant and gentle. The pulse of a movement, Clear Voices, was more than just a saying. It had entered the rhythm of community life. In the library, where neighbors assembled to discuss matters. In the school, where one student worked late into the night by candlelight. In the playground, where children learned, dreamed, and played. Jasmine stood up from the bench, not in pride, but in thankfulness. The future she had imagined wasn't a news headline or a news-making moment. It was right before her, quietly unfolding, in the voices that had mustered the courage and decided to use it. And sometimes the loudest moments in life are the quiet ones. Someone chooses not to walk away, when a voice shakes but speaks anyway, when the truth prefers to stand even if it stands alone. Jasmine's story teaches us that true strength is not in overpowering others, but in holding firm to what's right, even when the price is high. We all have those moments where we're challenged to choose between comfort and conviction, silence and courage. And in those moments, what truly matters isn't the attention or the headlines, it's the neighbor who listens, the child who learns from our example, the small acts of kindness that ripple outward. So perhaps tonight, we take a breath. Consider what we stand for. And when it is our turn to speak, be it in a town hall, a kitchen, or a quiet exchange, may we do so with honesty, grace, and just enough hope to light the way.